UFC 276 is almost here. I'm going to give you my final picks. We're going to talk about some props that we like, and we're going to build some lineups, so make sure you watch until the end. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. If you haven't had the chance to, go back and watch the predictions video from earlier in the week. It'll be linked right in the top of the description. Very useful information. And as it stands right now, barring any kind of botched weight cuts or knees locking up or people fainting on the scales, whatever could happen, we have 12 fights to work with on what is a banger of a card. And I think this is where you and I assert our dominance this week. I think viewers of this channel are going to be taking down their contests this week. They're going to be hitting a lot of bets, maybe some parlays as well. We might talk a little bit about that, but I think this is a week where we flex our guns. And from a DraftKings perspective, there are a lot of things that we could do when it comes to building lineups to help us gain leverage over the field, capture some upside. I think there's sneaky tactics that we can use this week to show up at the top of our contest. I'm ready. But before we start building the lineups, we need to find out where the value is. Plays at 8,000 and below, where we should be putting our money. I think the first stop is right at 8,000 with Dricus Du Plessis. Excellent value at this price. Du Plessis is currently a minus 145 favorite with money continuing to come in on him, which means that he's as big of a favorite as Jessica Rose Clark, who's priced at 8,600 on this slate with what I would consider a tougher matchup. And the reason that money's come in on him and made him the favorite is because he's going to finish Brad Tavares in this fight. We talked about this in the video from earlier in the week. Du Plessis has a ton of advantages here. He's got the power, the grappling, the size, the speed, the youth, a ton of advantages on his side. Everything you would want in a guy who's matched up against Brad Tavares, who has one stoppage in the last 11 years. On top of that, Brad Tavares is a low output. He doesn't shoot for many takedowns, and he doesn't really press the action. I think Du Plessis scores a knockdown here and finds a submission inside the first or second round, scores over 100 DraftKings points like he has in his first 2 UFC fights. And obviously at this price, with that kind of score, he shows up on the optimal lineup. Insane value at this price.
It's free real estate.
And this is our next value play down here at 7,700. We have Bryan Barberena, decent value because he's going to throw north of 200 strikes in my opinion. This fight has potential to be fight of the night just because these guys are going to stand and trade for what I assume is going to be the whole 15 minutes. And the value that's built into Barberena's price comes from that volume that we just mentioned, because if you look at his last fight against Matt Brown, 186 strikes with 111 significant strikes. In that fight, he scores 96 points. He had over 100 significant strikes against Darian Weeks, only scoring 79 points, but I think that he's going to throw more against Robbie Lawler. Even when you look at his fight against Anthony Ivy, decision win where he throws 175 strikes, but he was taken down 5 times in that fight. So even though he's getting taken down, he's getting right back up and he's continuing to throw. And you can look at some of Robbie Lawler's fights recently against Nick Diaz, Colby Covington, RDA, where he's giving up north of 150 strikes. And it's because he's there to be hit, he wants to put on a show, he's going to stay in the pocket, but the fact of the matter is he's 40 years old by now. He was never the fastest guy to begin with, but he's definitely slowing down over time, and I expect the volume from Bryan Barberena to win him a decision in this spot. We did talk about earlier in the week how it could get a little fishy if the fight's close. The judges might give it to Robbie Lawler just because he's a legend, but if this is judged correctly and Bryan Barberena fights the way that Bryan Barberena does and Robbie Lawler defends the way Robbie Lawler does, Barberena wins a decision and he scores around 95 DraftKings points. Good play this week. Our next value is here at 7,600. We have Julija Stoliarenko, and like we talked about in the predictions video, I think that she wins this fight by way of submission. At the time of recording this, you can take Julija Stoliarenko by decision for about plus 400 on your sportsbook. I already took that. And to me, Jessica Rose Clark has just been very unimpressive with her lay and pray style of fighting, and if she hangs out on the ground for too long with Stoliarenko, she's going to end up getting armbarred. I think this could actually look a lot like her fight with Stephanie Egger, where she's just playing the grappling too much, she gets thrown, she gets armbarred, game over. So I think Jessica Rose Clark is in serious danger if she decides to wrestle in this fight, and on the feet I do expect it to be competitive. Now Stoliarenko does eat a ton of shots, but Jessica Rose Clark isn't a great striker by any means, so I don't really worry about the stand-up. I'm not scared.
I'm not scared!
It's also the first fight of the night. It's women's MMA, so you know that the ownership is going to be very low. So I see this as a solid opportunity for leverage, finishing upside, low price. That all equals good value here on Julija Stoliarenko. Our next value is here at 7,400 on Gabe Green. Let me tell you, man, Gabe Green is going to kick Ian Garry's ass this week. Gabe Green is going to bring a rough fight to Ian Garry, and I expect him to wilt under the pressure because Ian Garry likes to move back a lot. He likes to lean back a lot, relies heavily on counter striking, and he doesn't move his head all that well. On this side of the matchup, Gabe Green throws a ton of power. He can wrestle. He's got a good chin on him. Even in his last fight, he was floored by Johan Lioness, who's a much bigger puncher than Ian Garry is. He came back to win that fight, finish it in the second round, albeit Lioness gassed out hard, and that's why Green was still fresh in the second, but the grit that he showed to get the fight to that point is what I think Ian Garry will struggle with. Garry fought Jordan Williams, and he fought Darian Weeks, and Jordan Williams is 9-6, doesn't have a great chin, walked onto a straight punch with 1 second left in the round, in a round that he was dominating, and Darian Weeks was moving forward, but he wasn't really doing all that much. I think the first person that beats Ian Garry is going to be someone who can overwhelm him, and I think Gabe Green brings that style. So I actually like Gabe Green inside the distance this week. I actually took that bet as well at around plus 350. And then the last value play is the former champion Max Holloway, the best punt play, by the way. If you're playing cash, you'll absolutely need him in your lineup, and you should be stacking the co-main event as it is. He's going to throw a ton of strikes, win or lose, so his scoring floor is among the highest on the slate, which means that in cash, again, he's a must roster, but I also think that he can win this fight. I think he can win this fight just based on volume. I think the issue that he has, though, from a judging perspective, is that if he's not absolutely dominant and that's not a clear-cut round, they're going to give it to Volkanovski. And what worries me there is that if he doesn't have the power to knock Volkanovski down, then the rounds won't be clear enough, and then one judge or two judge will give it to the champion. So this is going to be an uphill battle for Max Holloway this week, but I do think that he should be able to get it done. I think if he does what he did in their second fight, but does a little bit more in the third, fourth, or fifth round, then he'll be able to steal a decision win here. I do think it's tough, and for Draftkings, again, you need him on cash, but I don't know if you necessarily need him in tournaments. Now, those are the value plays that I think are worth rostering, and you might be thinking, well, Kunith, where the hell is Sean Strickland? So here's the thing with Sean Strickland. As of right now, he is the favorite in this matchup, despite being cheaper on Draftkings. However, I don't think that this is a must roster spot, and I actually think that this fight goes way over owned. We get fights like this from time to time where it's expected to be a banger, but it could easily go the distance, and from a fantasy perspective, it falls short of expectations. You could think back to fights like Alonzo Menefield versus William Knight. You could think back to Santiago Ponzinibbio and Michel Pereira, or Randy Brown, Chaos Williams. Most recently, just last week, Chris Curtis, Adolfo Vieira. That fight went the distance. No knockdowns from Curtis. 0 for 20 on takedown attempts from Vieira. Meanwhile, almost everybody rostered that fight, just like the fights that we named before that. This could be a similar situation. You have a fight that on paper looks like a banger. In real life, it's probably going to be awesome, but they might not score all that points from a fantasy perspective. Even if Sean Strickland is going out there and looking to wrestle, it might be more position over submission. Let me win minutes here. Let me win the round, but not really doing all that much from on top. And I say that because we could find out right in the first 3 or 4 minutes if Alex Pereira is that much better of an MMA striker than Sean Strickland is, and if that's the case, he's not going to want to let that guy up. And I do think that Sean Strickland wins this fight just because his striking defense is superb. He's going to grapple in this fight. He's got a good chin, definitely enough cardio to go hard for 3 rounds, and because of that, I don't expect Alex Pereira to put him out, and I can also see him winning a decision on his own, but he might score around 75-80 points. That's not what you're going to need, and I think both sides of this matchup go way over owned. And keeping those things in mind, now we can start building some lineups. Before we do, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm, anything. You know how the algorithm works. And again, I know you might be sick of it at this point, but I have to thank you guys for the overwhelming support. Like, things are moving a lot faster than I thought they would, all because of you guys. I appreciate it. And I'll give myself a small pat on the back because I know why you're here. Better videos, better looking Papa John's. Now we can get into building some lineups real quick. Shout out Western New York. Shout out all you Canadian MMA fans out there. I know there's a lot. Okay, so off the rip, we're going to look at what a cash game lineup should be, but unfortunately, I was informed that I may be violating the terms and conditions with Draftkings by posting what the cash game lineup should be on Twitter, so we're just going to do a very specific look right now. But you can still follow me on Twitter so we can react during the fights. You can send me some of your lineups. I can give you critique. If you send me your lineups on Twitter, which is Kunith MMA linked in the description. Please let me know what kind of contests you're in and how many players you're playing against. Now for cash games, again, I think a must roster fight is the one here with Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway, the co-main event you need to have in your cash games. Now we have $84.50 left over per fighter, so we're going to save a little bit of salary by coming down to Dricus du Plessis at $8,000. We're going to grab Jalin Turner at $8,400. If you watched the video earlier in the week, you know how I feel about Jalin Turner this week. What I think makes a lot of sense at this point is to go with somebody like Bryan Barberena, who again is going to throw a ton of strikes. And then you can also come up here to Sean O'Malley at $9,300, because here's the deal with Sean O'Malley. Pedro Munhoz is not going to get knocked out in this fight, I don't believe. I don't think that Sean O'Malley is going to even knock down Pedro Munhoz in this fight. But what I do think could happen is that Sean O'Malley ends up landing around 200 plus strikes like he did against Chris Moutinho. And I think that gives him the potential to be one of the highest scoring fighters on the slate. Because even though this fight was stopped in the third round when maybe it shouldn't have been, we're looking at a situation where if you took away those 15 points that he got from the round 3 stoppage, then he still scored over 130 DraftKings points that night just because of the volume, and I could see him having a similar performance here against Pedro Munhoz, who's going to be there to be hit. So I think when you're playing your cash games, this is a smart way to attack it. I really wouldn't change much from here. I think this makes a ton of sense. If you were worried about Bryan Barberena, we can see what else we can do. This is when you could grab somebody like Sean Strickland, even though I think he's in a worse matchup than Bryan Barberena is. You wouldn't play Brad Riddell in this lineup with Jalin Turner. Julija Stoliarenko, I don't think that it makes sense for you to play her in cash because she is very boom or bust. Cowboy could be sneaky, but this is definitely a tournament play because I do think that Jim Miller probably knocks him out, but I don't think that this fight goes the distance. So if Jim Miller doesn't knock him out, then I think Cowboy probably knocks him out with a high kick or something like that. Sneaky value here at $7,500, but not something that I would ever tell you to bet on, not Cowboy at this stage in his career. So when you look at the rest of the landscape here, I think it makes the most sense to play Bryan Barberena at $7,700, and this is probably how you should attack your cash games. Now, a lot of you might be thinking that you were playing Israel Adesanya in your cash games. I wouldn't recommend playing Adesanya in any kind of lineup that you have this week. If we look at the fighters at 9,000 and above, I think that Israel Adesanya, outside of Maycee Barber, probably scores the least of this whole space if they all win. And I would be shocked if he was on the winning lineup in really any of your contests. So do not play Israel Adesanya this week. Now, what you'll probably see in a lot of your tournaments is you'll probably see people come to Israel Adesanya, Sean O'Malley, Alexander Volkanovski. I think you might see somebody like Gabe Green get a lot of ownership. You might see Donald Cerrone get a lot of ownership. And then somebody might punt somebody down here, like say, for example, Uriah Hall, hoping for knockout upside. And if that's the case, they might come off of somebody like Donald Cerrone and then they'll go grab Sean Strickland. I could see you going up against a ton of this in your contests this week. Now, if it's not like that, let's say they took Adesanya out, they wanted to grab somebody like Jim Miller instead. They come off of Sean Strickland, they go the other way with Alex Pereira. I think this might be something that you see a lot of in your tournaments, but this is the way that I think that you should be attacking your tournaments this week. Let me show you. I don't think that the 2 title fights are must plays at all. I like up here Andre Muniz. I think he's going to be under-owned. I think he's got a great matchup on his hands. This guy's a monster. We talked about this a lot in the video earlier in the week. Jim Miller, I think there's a lot of knockout upside there. You got Jalin Turner, du Plessis. You can come down here to somebody like Gabe Green, for example, and then you've got 8,300 left over. You could go to Alex Pereira. You could go to Sean Strickland, Brad Riddell, Bryan Barberena, or you could take a shot with Julija Stoliarenko. Now, if you didn't want to play Jim Miller, you were afraid of just the age of Jim Miller, you can come up here to Sean O'Malley, who is probably going to pull high ownership, but again, you have 2 champions here. They're definitely going to pull a ton of ownership, so this is still a good way to get different. And with a lineup like this, you have high finishing upside, a lot of strikes being thrown, and obviously the knockout's always on the table for Sugar Sean. You have inside the distance probability for Jalin Turner, inside the distance for du Plessis, inside the distance for Gabe Green, and if Stoliarenko wins, it's probably because she tied up an armbar in the first or second round. Another way you could attack this, for example, is if you wanted to take out Sean O'Malley, you wanted to put Alexander Volkanovski in there. You can come off of Stoliarenko, and then you can come back here to Bryan Barberena, I think this makes sense. If you wanted to come down from Andre Muniz and grab somebody like Jim Miller, you've got 800 left over. I think this is something that a lot of people won't do. If you're not sold on the Gabe Green pick, you can come off of him. That gives us a few different spots to work with, not a ton. You're stuck playing Sean Strickland, who I don't really recommend. Brad Riddell, I don't think that he wins. And then Julija Stoliarenko, which is pretty boom or bust, but this is a good way for you to get different. And some of you might believe in Ian Garry this week. You might believe in Alex Pereira. You might think that Robbie Lawler gets it done, just to give you a different look. Now you're more mid-range heavy. I'm very, very confident that Dricus du Plessis gets it done this week, so we'll put him in there. Now you've got 8,200 left over per fighter. I still find myself coming here to Jalin Turner, and then you're down here choosing between somebody like, well, you wouldn't choose Strickland, Riddell, or Barberena in this matchup, so we're back here at Julija Stoliarenko. We're back here at somebody like Cowboy Cerrone or Max Holloway. You can do that. And if you fully believe that the Blessed Express is going to come through Vegas this week, then you could play Max Holloway and do a lot of different things with your lineup. If you were to send me this lineup on Twitter, what I would probably tell you to do is come off of somebody like Robbie Lawler and go grab you some Andre Muniz. And now if we wanted to blow this up, let's say we started our lineup on this side with Max Holloway, who we know has some of the highest scoring potential in the entire UFC with how many strikes that he throws. If we start here, we could grab somebody again like Jalin Turner. I grabbed du Plessis. I know this probably sounds redundant by now, but I think that these two are must plays this week. I would probably take a shot down here at Gabe Green, and now you could do literally whatever you want with 9,500 left over per fighter, so I'd probably double up right here. This makes a lot of sense, and this is probably going to be a very different lineup for you. And a viable small tweak that you can make if you are a little afraid of Ian Garry, you can come up here to Bryan Barberena. That makes sense, or you can go to Julija Stoliarenko. That makes sense. There are a couple of ways to play this, but I think the smartest way that you can approach the slate this week is by avoiding some of the title favorites. I think playing Sean O'Malley, Andre Muniz should be your preferred options above 9,000. I think that Dricus du Plessis and Jalin Turner are absolute steals at their price this week. And a couple of these value plays that we looked at, I think make a ton of sense as well. Now, by the time you're seeing this, if you commented your name on either video or if you sent me a request on DraftKings, I have added you as a friend. We've opened the contest. If you don't know by now, let me bring you up to speed. The winner of our private contest this week is going to get one of these gloves, and then for the next event, we'll do the other glove. If you tie, it's a push and we just have to do it again. But if you are the clear-cut winner, you are going to get one of these gloves. We'll work out the details after. If you're new to the channel, this is your first time watching this and you want to compete for one of the signed gloves, send me a request on DraftKings. I'm going to put my username in the comments below in a pinned comment. We're going to be doing a contest of around 200 people this week. It's single entry. It's completely free. And again, if you win, you get one of the gloves. I'll just mail it to you. Shout out to Shane last week, who ended up winning our first ever contest, and I'll make it up to you. I know it wasn't for the glove, Shane, but I got you, brother. Trust. You can't just win the first contest ever and not get anything, so we'll take care of you. But he put together a very strong lineup, 6 winners, and we preach this all the time. 6 winners in your lineup, that's all it takes. Great call on the Carlos Ulberg. Stefanchuk, we gave him everything that he needed. Obviously, the good call with Mateusz Gamrot, who we expected to win. We expected him to get the decision win just based on judging, really. Chris Curtis, underwhelming. He was drafted at 42% in this contest, but he still got the W. Josh Parisian, this came completely out of left field, only 6% owned. That's pretty cool. Umar Nurmagomedov was a lock. He did exactly what Umar does, and this was just career worst performance from Brian Kelleher. This dude got taken down twice, gave up mount, gave up his back, and got submitted all inside of like 2 minutes. Absurd, but you called it. And we're gonna wrap up by giving you every play of the card. Also, these are method of victories that we're attacking here. If you were to take these the same exact way last week, you would be up. If you put 1 unit on every method of victory that we called last week, you would have been positive. So we're looking to replicate that this week. I'm going to start right at the top. I have Adesanya by decision, Max Holloway by decision, Sean Strickland by decision, Bryan Barberena by decision, Sean O'Malley by decision, inside the distance for Jalin Turner, knockout by Jim Miller, inside the distance for Gabe Green, inside the distance for du Plessis, submission by Andre Muniz, decision by Barber, submission by Julija Stoliarenko. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you leave a like on the video. comment something for the algorithm, subscribe to the channel, because if you don't subscribe, it's bad luck. A witch told me. There you go. I wish you all the best of luck this week and best of luck in the private contest.